First, I want to thank the organizers for this great event here. HAI, the Accelerator for Learning, what a great event they put on, right? So that's for all the people who were the organizers, who got us here, people who delivered coffee, people who cleaned up after lunch. It takes a lot to make an event like this happen. And so, thank you for that. I'm also greatly appreciative of the fact that this is explicitly about generative AI. I've traveled a bunch of different places over the last couple months, and it seems like no matter what the topic is, everyone wants to talk about Chat GPT. So it's great to have an actual event where that's announced to be the topic, and we're not just piling that on top of something else. So good foresight on that. So thank you for being here and participating, and it's great to have great speakers. So Sal, Chris, come on out. I'm not sure I really need to introduce Sal Khan. How many people have not heard of Khan Academy? All right, so I think I won't say anything more. And how many people have not heard of Piech Academy? Oh, I meant Code in Place. Okay. So why don't we start with something good and happy and promising and all that? Like, how is the future going to be better than the present and the past? And will AI have a role in that? Want to start?
Oh, yeah. No, I'm very optimistic about that. There's a lot of hand-wringing, obviously, about ChatGPT, and most famously, its ability to write essays for people, and which obviously could be your term paper, but it could also be college admissions essays. I've pointed out in some ways, especially on the latter one, it's just putting a spotlight on something that's always been there. People, affluent families hire not AIs, but Is to help their kids write college essays, and sometimes in the Varsity Blues extreme examples, writing it for them. And it's honestly very hard to police that, and who knows what's going on the term paper side of things. But what's exciting about there's a lot of hand-wringing, but I think we're months away from folks realizing that there's a lot of upside here from generative AI. I've done experiments with my own kids where instead of writing the story for them, it writes the story with them. And for example, my 8-year-old was like, "Hey, what do you want to write the story about?" And well, I'll give an example with my daughter recently. We did this over Christmas break, where she's writing a story with a generative AI, and it was about, so what do you want to write about? And it was a great idea. My daughter said, a social media influencer stranded on a desert island.
That's a pretty original topic.
Yeah,
I've never heard that one before.
That was great. Okay. My 11-year-old daughter, I was like, that could be like a Disney, miniseries. And they started getting into the story. What do you want it to be about? How did she get on? And the AI is asking my daughter, how did she get on the desert island? She's like, oh, she was on a cruise, And
so it came out of the
and it's pulling it out of her. And at some point, and this is why we're living in the future right now, my daughter's like, could I talk to the main character? And I said, let's try. And so she says, I would like to talk to Samantha. And so it just switched. Samantha here. Hey, Dia, I need your help. I'm stuck here. This lagoon is beautiful, but I can't share it with anyone. At least I can talk to you. And then my daughter's like, don't worry, Samantha. Look, this is just showing you to appreciate what you have in front of you, and you don't have to share it with other people. And I was like, this is science fiction. But it's beautiful. This is exactly what a learning experience. It's like the magic school bus. Same thing with my son. He's 8 years old. He's not traditionally into writing, but he doesn't view this writing, but he's co-writing stories. I think there's going to be potential to, this isn't science fiction. I think we're months, not years, away from a teacher being able to assign, go interview your favorite historical character. We're studying Greek mythology. Go interview Zeus. Why did he do that? What's his motivation? And have a conversation. Have a conversation with Gentleman Darcy from Pride and Prejudice. And why is he acting that way? And what was he really think when that scene was going on? What was going on in his mind? Having debates on either side. Right? These are things, unfortunately, we're probably having less and less civilized debates these days, but you can start to have that. So I'm very optimistic, and I think every time thoughtful people spend even half an hour about it, they think of 5 or 10 new positive use cases. And on the negative use cases, a lot of the negative use cases are people intentionally trying to prompt inject and get the AI to act like a Nazi and all of that. But that's not going to be, most people aren't going to do that. And if you are doing that, then you're not. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. But like, I think there's going to be mechanisms where a teacher, a parent can monitor the student's use. I think, and what's beautiful about the generative AI is it can also flag if the conversation goes someplace where, hey, you probably need a little bit more oversight here. But I think it's very exciting. We build teacher tools, and we're already thinking of like, the old world of teacher tools. They have to look at these spreadsheet-like dashboards. The future is going to be they just ask questions like, which students should I worry about? What could I do with them? Teachers spend half their time lesson planning. I think within a year,
so it's going to be automated teacher, an automated teacher assistant, an automated.
Yeah, I'll be careful. I don't think, I think the human element's always going to be very valuable. I always say the best technology versus the best teacher. I'll pick the best teacher. But the combination, I think the automated teaching assistant, tutor.
Yeah, just someone to help you out. Yeah, research happens to be digital.
Exactly.
Chris, what do you see happening? What do you think will be important in the future?
I like that you talked about creation, because I had that moment too, right? And actually, for me, I'll speak to Dolly, right? Or Midjourney. I had this moment of I was creating artwork, and I lost a whole day. It was like a Saturday. It's like, oh my god! And I'd go find my wife. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and she didn't understand it as much. But I'd show my wife, I'm like, look what I made. She's like, that's nice, honey. And I felt so much pride and joy for having done that. And maybe just building on your point, it's interesting that we both talked about this because they're both examples of you could do something you couldn't do before. And if you imagine yourself being a 6-year-old, that thing that I could do something and create in ways I couldn't possibly imagine, that's so motivating. And I do think about myself as a computer science teacher. I love teaching computer science. It's like the most fun thing I could possibly imagine doing. And why? Because my students can make stuff. I think the future is going to have kids making things in ways we can't even imagine, making things that not only do we not imagine a 6-year-old could make, but maybe we didn't even imagine was possible to make. That sounds like a joyful vision of where optimistically we could go.
Yeah, so one direction I think is people can learn new things in new ways. And I think you both talked about that. What about helping the teacher? Well, how do you think that generative AI can help us be better teachers or help teachers in the field, kind of do what they want to do better and be more responsive to students? What's your thought there?
I think there's so much. And once again, we could probably think of 5 new use cases while we sit here. But I think on-the-fly lesson planning, right? It's already here. You could take an existing lesson plan, copy and paste, and say, hey, we live in Kansas City. The Chiefs just won the Super Bowl. Make it about them, or make it more hands-on, or whatever. Give me a better hook to really capture. And already there's generative AI systems that will do that for you. And so I think it's just natural that those tools are going to get better. And obviously the large language models are going to get better and better. So that's huge, first of all. And it even starts to make us question the notion of curricula. Because we at Khan Academy, we've talked a long time about personalization of student pace and mastery. But there's always been this other thing called curriculum, which is always come from a publisher or the state. And it's like this very rigid thing, like day by day, do this lesson and that lesson. But most teachers ignore it, and they just do their own custom lesson plans anyway. They spend about half their time doing that. I think this is going to be huge for that. I think there's going to be a lot, once again, in teacher prep time. And this is, I've made videos on cellular respiration, but if I had to teach it to someone tomorrow, I'd want to refresh my knowledge a little bit. I think there's going to be really cool things where in a Socratic way, you could do that. I think teaching, a lot of professions, but teaching especially, it can be a very lonely profession. You're one adult with 30, 100 students, whatever. I think having even a conversation with the generative AI as an instructional coach to kind of help you problem solve what's going on in the classroom, even bordering on things like a therapist keeping you motivated, life coach. I think could be really valuable.
So do you see that being used in the near term in Khan Academy and your school and other things you're concretely involved in? What do you think is the path over the next year or 2 years? What's short term?
I think if we're talking a year from now, I think not only will these things exist, but there's several schools that I was involved starting. There's Khan Lab School, which is down the street literally, and then we have an online high school with Arizona State University. I think we're already looking at how do we integrate this into at Khan World School and at Khan Lab School. We have this thing called Seminar, where students debate topics like, should we cancel student debt? Should we use CRISPR to modify the human gene? And there are these really great in-person conversations. But we've already started doing user testing with some of these prompts around large language models to have students do the test. And what we're hearing from the high school students is like, oh wait, this is so cool. I can test my ideas and hone my ideas without fear of judgment from my peers. It's much harder with 15 people to say, oh, I think this is the reason why we should or shouldn't do the following. But to sit there and hone your judgment and have a sparring partner that's completely safe. We have already done user tests with students and they love it. And honestly, they don't want to stop doing it. So simple answer is yes. It's gonna be here, honestly, by next school year at the latest.
And how are we going to use ChatGPT and Code in Place or CS106 in the spring? What do you see happening, Chris?
Yeah. Okay. So for context, for people that don't know, we run this class called Code in Place, and we're getting 1,000 teachers that we're going to have to train how to teach. It's actually built on a different technology that was breakout in education not too long ago, Zoom, and this idea that we can really change who gets to play that role of teacher. In fact, we've discovered, and lots of other people know this, we really underestimate who could become a great teacher. And we really underestimate how many people there are who would like to play that role. And I feel like as ChatGPT gets better at some of the rote things, we're going to look for more and more meaning in teaching. So we have this whole class, but it means I have this very practical problem. I've got 1,000 teachers, April 24th. What sort of ChatGPT am I going to give them?
Got me.
Okay, okay, so I can tell you what has been greenlit and what has not been greenlit, and some of it you'll find surprising. Some of the greenlit things are, you can imagine, we can give new types of feedback at scale. We teach 10,000 students, and there's some types of feedback we could never give. What a dream to be able to give this with just a click of a button. Some things, when students get stuck, like the error messages they receive, we know that we could give much nicer conversations for those really quick feedback points. As you've heard, we're going to be doing teacher training in two really interesting ways. You learn the joys of teacher training, but it's scary to talk to real people. Before you talk to real people, let's put you in a classroom with 8 fake GPT students, and you can try and corral them before you walk into actually teaching 8 people from around the world. And then, as you guys know, Dora does amazing research on how you can give feedback to teachers afterwards. Those are all places that we're going to see it enter our classroom this spring. Here's a surprising one that we're not going to do. I've had about 4 or 5 people come to me with very good-looking AI tutors, and that is not going to be part of Code in Place.
Yeah, so I was going to ask where it's easy to talk optimistically as if this is a dream solution, something you would have hired a person to do before. Now you just have some automated, free digital agent to do that. But there is an issue about quality control, and will it go off the rails, or will it give an inappropriate response? Is that part of your evaluation there, or why you're not doing these tutors?
No, that's okay. You're right. It could say something very wrong and very confidently, and of course, that's a huge problem for a teacher. There's 2 issues that I think are really interesting, and one of them is that we're really tapping into how much humans want to teach, and it is pretty threatening to say, "Hey, you want to teach? What if we replaced you with this AI tutor?" And actually, I had this conversation earlier. Somebody asked me, if I gave you a great AI tutor or I gave you 1,000 teachers, kind of similar to what you said, it's like, I kind of want the 1,000 teachers. That I can't really put words to it, but I feel like the human connection is such a beautiful part of learning. Now, AI tutors will come, and we'll think about how they interact. But I had a motivation problem. And that's so interesting to think about, because I think there's a biggest issue of ChatGPT that we haven't talked about, is the motivation issues it's causing for our students. Imagine yourself being a 15-year-old, and now you have to guess what's worth learning and what's not. And all these skills are getting automated, and worse, ChatGPT is 3. By the time you get into the workforce, it's going to be ChatGPT 10, and it can do all the high-level things that we currently think that is in our domain. That motivation challenge is terrifying. Not for the people in this room. We all have jobs, or we're in wonderful positions. But if you don't have a job, you don't have a wonderful position, if you're one of the millions and millions of students around, billions of students around the world, this could be very hard on motivation.
That's right. I mean, you're teaching programming.
Yeah.
And generative AI is even better at programming than it is at writing English sentences, as far as I can tell.
Yeah.
So that seems like a pretty interesting concern. Well, how do you tell somebody it's useful to learn to write their own program when they can ask and get it automatically written for them?
I had a student in my office hours in tears. They're like, this is at Stanford. This is not in code in place. They're like, I've just learned how to program, and now this skill doesn't feel useful. And that is an emotion that many people are grappling with. Now, I said all these wonderful things. I said, okay, actually, this is in conversation with one of my wonderful colleagues, Cynthia Lee. Says, programmers have always lived on top of abstraction. This is just now a more powerful abstraction. We can do more beautiful and wonderful things with the skill of programming. I said that. I mostly believed it. I also said something like, every programmer has created more programming jobs. So as we train more programmers, it's not like the jobs ran out. We just created more positions. And now that we can be more efficient, we'll create more. And I also mostly believe that. But I do think after pandemic, our students were already going through a mental health crisis. I think now that they've lost some sense of motivation, this is one of the really interesting questions that I would encourage us all to think about that hasn't been raised, maybe because there's hard answers or there aren't really obvious answers.
Thoughts on that?
I tend to be on the abstraction crowd. I mean, if you looked at a programmer in the 1960s who was writing in machine code or assembly, and they saw or punch cards, and they saw the pre-generative AI tools that we have access to, they're like, that's cheating. You're getting away. You're not a real programmer if you're not literally punching ones and zeros into cards. So I think there's always going to be that, and I think the reality is it just goes back to the writing, is that we're all just going to be able to do more ambitious things, and there's no shortage of ambitious things. And I think the next, I remember when I was coming out of college in the late 90s, it felt like I missed the heyday of computing. Like, only if I had come out in the late 70s or 80s, I could have started Apple or Microsoft or whatever else.
But punch cards.
The late 90s was a pretty good time to be a new computer science graduate. And actually, the fear then was outsourcing. I remember I was working in Silicon Valley here in 2000, 2001, and everyone's like, well, these jobs are going to go to India, Sal. I had relatives. These jobs are going to go to India. You should do something else. Go to business school. I did that. But
how'd that turn out?
Well, 10 years later, the computer science was making more than the business school students. And so I think there's that skill set of being able to put these abstractions together, architect them at a higher and higher level of abstraction, actually only accreted more value to that skill set. And I think we're at a cusp where it's just going to be that what you can do with computing is just going into domains that even last year would have seemed like science fiction. I think it's so going away. I'm more worried about the people who don't have that mindset. If you are a copywriter, if you are a grant writer, if you are one of the people who write kind of these fairly generic news stories on websites or blogs, that I worry more about. But I'm not worried about people who can have the mindset of how do you put the pieces in place to make something pretty cool.
So I think we do have to imagine, somebody having this reaction. Why am I learning this if an automated system can do it already?
But is this recorded? Is somebody recording this? Because I'd love to just show that to my students.
Oh,
if it's not recorded, say it again afterwards.
I'll good.
We'll show it to all code in place.
But I think there might be a bigger question in this, which is, should we rethink what we're teaching in school? Should we rethink what the objectives are? Should we rethink the skills that we're asking students to learn? And what would be our process for doing that? What's your high-level thought on how we should look at what we recommend people learn and master going forward?
Go ahead.
We both started with something like generative, right? I guess generative AI, let's make the kids be able to create things like your daughter making the stories. Or maybe a middle schooler who's able to build some beautiful application they couldn't have imagined building without the help of this. And the nice thing about generation is it connects the dot from what you're doing to this is valuable to society. You make it, you show it to your loved ones interact with, like, that has deep value. And I think you worry a little bit less about your job when you're already creating value. A lot of middle school math students might not be creating math value by solving the word problems. And the sooner we can make the shift to they're creating value in the process of learning, I think the less they'll worry about, am I doing something useful?
Yeah, and I'll go to something Chris said earlier, which is people have been talking about things like project-based learning and building and all of that for decades. But the reality is, for most students who are in K-12, it's very hard for them to have the underlying knowledge or skill set to build something substantive. That is changing very quickly. Even pre-generative AI, I would tell my kid, I envy the tools that you have. You can do a YouTube channel. You can do this. You can compose music in interesting ways. This is just going to accelerate that by a whole nother level. But at the same time, there's tools like Mathematica that can factor a polynomial for the last 20 or 30 years. There's still, I believe, some value in at least that level of algebraic thinking that you have. And I think there's also going to be benefit in the computational thinking. I actually think no matter what, look, even at Khan Academy, I've encouraged our entire team to think about how this changes your job. We have software engineers who are already using the generative AIs. We have folks who are writing. Now, there's always a human in the loop, but it's increasing their productivity. And but it just allows everyone to become an architect, right? Before you were just writing one little piece of code and you testing it out. Now you can think more architecturally. You're going to do something more ambitious. So I think it's going to be valuable to be able to do that computational thinking, but you'll be able to just do a lot more.
Yeah, and one other thing I wanted to touch on and hear your thoughts on are, groups working together, social learning. How do you see these tools helping with that? And in addition, I think when there's new technology, it's a chance to rethink. So even if generative AI isn't critical, it's an opportunity to rethink what we're doing in education and look a little bit at this social aspect of learning and how important that is. And how would you see AI and the process in the next couple of years factoring into that?
I think, honestly, every 5 minutes, we're like, oh, it could do this, it could do it. We're already, AI can, we talked about a one-on-one Socratic conversation. It could facilitate a small group conversation. You could imagine having one or two AI students in the room that keeps the conversation going when the teachers, or modeling for other students what you could do. I think there's going to be really cool things where you're one teacher, you put the kids into breakout, and every one of those can have an AI facilitator. And I know there's a lot of fears about all of this, but I think we all know about the downsides of social media, where essentially you're put, or not even social media, the downsides of middle school, right? Like you just put a bunch of 13-year-olds together, bullying, meanness, Lord of the Flies, like that just happens. I think there's worlds where you could use some of these things to actually moderate and model so that you have better social social interactions. So yeah, I think it's early days. I don't want to make it sound like it's a cure-all for everything, but I think if properly deployed, I think ChatGPT just came out. It's like, here it is, everyone use it. See what? Obviously, that's people are figuring out all sorts of positive and negative use cases. But I think the more that you create an interesting application layer, show people how it can be used, and it's going to create some good stuff.
What do you think about pair programming, group work, and how we should approach that, and to what extent are new tools important for that?
I mean, speaking to that directly, there are some amazing students who I get to work with who have created pair programming as a central part of Code in Place. And in the last Code in Place, we realized that if you put humans together with humans, their completion rates were skyrocketing. And some education folks were interviewing them to find out why. They were commiserating. They weren't telling each other the answer. Be like, this is really hard. And made me think, wow, did I make a really hard class? That commiseration is what people really need. But it's as I have more access to AI, I'm leaning more and more into humans. I have a funny story for you've asked me this question before, but I was a PhD student rotating in your lab, and you're like, Chris, go write me a short story about the future of education. I was like, that's an odd request, but I did it, and I wrote it, and it felt very.
Do you still have it? I'd be interested to see what.
Yeah, I probably do.
What's our future?
And it felt very. I had to reflect because the first version I wrote felt very dystopian. It was like the future of AI in education. I had all these AI tutors, and we were learning these wonderful things. It just felt so lonely when I read the story. And I thought about, I didn't have a child then, I thought about a future child, I think. And I was like, that's not really what I want. I really want her to live in a very warm, filled with human environment. I don't want the bullying. Definitely don't want the bullying. I want her to learn the beautiful art of talking to humans. I also want her to learn the beautiful art of passing on knowledge. I think Noah this morning was talking about how us as a civilization, one of the most special things about humans is the way that we pass on knowledge from. It's so central to how I see myself as a human, and I want her to have all those things. And you can kind of see that in Code in Place. It's just, peer one-on-one peer matching. You get 1,000 people, maybe at any point in time, we could possibly drop in a human being to help you out. I think the most helpful thing the human being will say is, I don't know, but let me listen to you.
Right. We're here in the computer science department, there's probably every third person is looking for a research project or something to do. You're here now visiting this afternoon. What would you like us to work on? Well, are there some challenges, some things that you think if somebody solved that problem, if somebody made progress on it, that would be useful to you or to the projects and efforts you know about, or would make the world a better place from an educational standpoint? Any request to have everyone's attention. So what's on your mind?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I'll tell you what I'm telling the team at Khan Academy. Like, think of, we are thinking about essentially building the platform. I mean, in some ways, even reinventing ourselves as an organization, but building the platform so you can leverage, generate, these types of models. And I'm encouraging our team to like think divergently about new possibilities. Like, what if it co-writes a story and you can talk to the characters? What if you can interview? What if you can get into debate with, these completely new modalities? I think the learning management systems of the future are, could be AI intermediated. A lot of teachers spend time trying to communicate with parents and answering their questions. I think that can be. So I think there's just a lot of interesting questions around how do you facilitate better human-to-human communication by the AI. What I always point out, even pre-generative AI, when Khan Academy came on the scene, a lot of the cynics would say, oh, on-demand video, you're trying to replace the lecture, personalized exercises. What's left for the teacher? I'm like, there's so much left for the teacher. And actually, if you compare the delta between your classic classroom in when I grew up, where kids are pretty passive, they're kind of looking at the clock, someone's giving a canned lecture. That's not a very human experience. And then if you were to visit Khan Lab School, which does use Khan Academy pretty heavily, you'll see kids walking around, talking, collaborating with each other, walking up to the teacher, having a conversation in small groups. There's much more human-to-human interaction in that setting. You go to the next level, if we imagine a year from now, students can have a debate with the AI, or they can have two students at this. They don't have to wait till tomorrow at noon to have that conversation. Khan World School has kids from all over the world able to do it together. I think there's ways where it just becomes more and more human.
So it sounds to me like we have basic values about education, things that we think can and should happen, things we'd like to facilitate. And in some sense, we're still at the point of ideation.
Mm-hmm.
How could we use generative AI in service of the things that we believe? That seems fair?
Yeah, and I'll say one thing though. I think there's the ideal, right? I think this can raise the ceiling, right? You take a well-resourced environment and take more off the teacher's table and off their plate, more off the students' plate, so that they can do more interesting things together. But there's a lot of young people, learners of all ages, who don't have access to a school, who don't have access especially to a good school, who even have access to a good school. Maybe that class isn't connecting, or maybe it does, but it's 2 a.m. and you are stuck. And right now you go to Khan Academy, you go, and that's great. But if you could get a generative AI who can answer your questions right in that moment, I think it'd be even better.
So Chris, I want to give you a parallel version of that question. And then I think we might have time for questions from the audience. That's kind of, somebody out there might have a different kind of thought or an idea that we could explore. So we have computer scientists in the room. We also have people from other fields, from local companies, from different lines of activity here. What are the things that you think someone else could work on that would help you in the directions you think are productive for computer science education and other things you're involved with?
I love it. And I think about this a lot because I get the wonderful chance to mentor a bunch of folks. Certainly there's 2 main things that are types of work that are going to be happening in the next year. And one set of work will be people trying to accelerate different parts of the learning and teaching process. But there will be a whole bunch of people generating things we've never seen before. I'm really a lot more excited about the generating something I've never seen before. Think about all the kids around the world who are just sitting in a classroom and maybe not finding education that fun. Maybe they're learning math, they don't know why. Doing that more efficiently might not really move the needle. If this is our chance to really change the game, it probably won't be just quicker math instruction. It'll probably be something that changes their perception of their identity with math. And that leaves a lot of chance for you to be creative. You could do something GPT-3 couldn't even do. So go invent something that maybe a middle schooler could pick up and go, wow, I can do this. I think you could really move the needle on education. And maybe something optimistic. What a great time to get into this field. It's never been more opportunities for a brand new researcher to do something that could really make people think about education differently. It's such an exciting time. So
yeah, there's
try.
no second that. I think generative AI, recent advances have kind of made some older approaches and some existing projects somewhat not state of the art. So it's a great time to jump in with new tools and kind of start fresh with the power that we have with the new technology. I think it's a great time to start. I hope it's a good time to start something.
Oh yeah.
And there's a C grant if you have an idea.
Good. I mean, one topic I thought would be interesting to talk about assessment.
Yeah.
A few people in our department have given their final exams to Chat GPT, and they generally report, A minus, B plus. So if this current version of this technology is about average for Stanford students or Stanford graduate students, which is a pretty selective group, then it's doing pretty well. So should we rethink assessment? Is there something better? Is there an interview? Is there interactive appraisal of someone's skills? Is a simulation that would test, your ability to solve problems in a certain environment? Is that better than a test, than an exam that we're given? Any thoughts on that? And then I don't know if do you have a microphone to get questions? Okay. But why don't you, while the microphone gets over there, give any quick thought?
No, we're thinking about that, but like the gold standard, things like oral exams. I mean, you could essentially do that now, and it's on demand, and you have as many shots at goal as you need. But I think there will be more, interactive. You have to create things, work through puzzles with it. I mean,
which would be great. It'd be a nice improvement over the exams we have.
We're all having a good time here. A bunch of my colleagues are freaking out. Right? Like plagiarism is like such an issue. We don't know who's coming to 106A exam. You could take your phone to the bathroom and write in the question and have an answer in seconds. People are very nervous about assessment. So interesting question, but I'm going to throw a wild idea out there. It came from a friend of mine. He said, I trust somebody knows something. Oh my God, I can't believe how many times I've talked about teachers, but hang around me, I'll talk about them even more. He said, I trust somebody can do something if they've taught it. And maybe the future of education is you must prove that you know something via teaching. And look out, I think this is something that some students are going to lead in Code in Place. So I'll teach Stanford. My Stanford students will be 3 weeks ahead of my Code in Place students. If I give them an exam, I can't be sure that they didn't go to the bathroom. But if they teach 10 people in Code in Place, I can be pretty sure that they know at least what they taught. And I also can be pretty sure that they are who they are. And speaking of motivation, how much has education just been about me? It's like me, I'm getting better. My students will now be assessed by doing something for others. And for those of my students who are more motivated by doing something that's socially beneficial, it could be interesting. Could be a total disaster. Look out for that coming.
Well, wait and stay tuned, Bruce.
So I was kind of thinking about when I was a cognitive science student in the kind of like late 90s, there was this big kind of debate about what is psychology. We're trying to build these explanatory theories of the human mind, of its mechanisms, its representations, how it works, and they're explanatory and you can do all this stuff. But then there were these CMU connectionists who were like saying, I've got this weight matrix and it can model all of this human data. And people were saying, that's not psychology. You can't tell me what the weight matrix, you can't tell me a story about what's going on in the weight matrix. So if we were to take that debate of black box versus explanatory theory and now bring it up to what's going on inside ChatGPT, what can we learn about the human mind and mental representation and the functions that are happening? And how do we get out of this, like, who knows? There's a black box. If the people who created it have no idea what's going on inside there, or like how it could be improved. And could we ever reach the point where we could say, hey, I want to have 3 chat GPTs in this one. I want to be more creative by making it, bend things. In this one, I want it to break things. In this one, I want to blend things at 10, 20, 30% and see how do people experience that as creativity, which presupposes what's inside the black box.
Any insight into that? I would ask somebody like you if I had that question.
Well, I'll just say, I mean, you said exactly the fact that we can experiment on these things, makes that interesting. We might actually, the more that you think about how these generative large language models work, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of parallels with that in the human brain. And so if you can start to experiment, we can actually finally start to have explanatory models.
Some colleagues in my department are trying to understand how the human brain works. And it's a very similar black box. And you know what their best mechanism right now is? Train a deep learning model that looks a lot like it and then query the deep learning model. I think there is something very deep in what you said too, that for the longest time we tried to have simple representations of what humans know, what they're capable of doing. And I've just learned over the 20 years in this field that it's just not possible to articulate in that language the complexities and the beauty of learning.
All right, any brave person that wants to put up their hand gets to ask a question. Go for it.
Thank you both for speaking here today. My question is, we've heard a lot about the amazing potential of generative AI for teaching, and I think that we're all really excited for it. But one conversation that we've had today is about the limits of generative AI. I'll take ChatGPT as an example. For example, if we're teaching students how to write, how early do we want to start introducing ChatGPT as an example? Do we want to start at elementary school or middle school? Do we want to wait till high school? Or do we introduce it at all at the high school level? And so my question, a bit more broader, is where do you see the limits potentially of generative AI in terms of introducing it into the classroom? Are there instances where you would say it's not the right place to introduce this now?
I'll start. I think there's a difference between ChatGPT as a product versus the idea of leveraging large language models. I think in the not too far off future, you will see tools that use large language models that are very appropriate for younger kids. And what makes them appropriate is, once again, it's not just like, write this for me, here's my assignment. It's going to be, hey, let's write a story together. And it might even have text to speech and speech to text. It might even have a little avatar that can talk to you. I think that's great. You're going to be able to monitor what the students have, and teachers, parents are going to be able to get summaries. What have my students been up to? It's like, oh, they've been writing stories about this, that. One student in particular seems to really want me to do all the work. Go talk to him or her. So I actually think there's going to be modalities that could leverage large language models at almost any age. It's really just what the application looks like. So yes, ChatGPT is probably not right for most students, but there will be things that use the similar technologies. Now the limitations, obviously, it hallucinates and facts and data, and that's probably the biggest concern. But I think it's quickly, as we go to next generation models, probably in the next year or two, you're going to see those things go down dramatically, yeah, the risk will go down.
Quick comment on that?
Isn't ChatGPT-4 supposed to be released like momentarily, and won't that completely change the answer? I feel like one of the things we've done this whole day is we're trying to guess under all this uncertainty of what GPT-4, 5, 6, 7 looks like. We're in for a wild ride. What a non-answer.
Yeah, I mean, my additional thought is we hope we have skilled, thoughtful, concerned teachers. We hope we have good people working throughout the educational infrastructure and ecosystem looking at that question. And different schools, different teachers will make different decisions, and we'll all try to learn from that and go forward and do good stuff. At least that's what I would hope. All right, thank you guys. Sure.